Yeah, it's time to start. Can we close those back doors? Thank you very much. Welcome. Welcome to Gallup. Welcome to the Gallup building. My name is Jim Clifton, and I'm Chairman and CEO of Gallup, and it means a lot to me and the whole tribe, and I think guide everybody at ILO that you're all here with an interest in what we've been doing. Some of you have asked me about this building. Maybe I'll just say it to the whole group, but it reminds you how new the Great American Experiment is. They closed this building down, so this is headquarters of the Masons. So if you look at the brickwork and look down the side of it, some of the best masonry that's ever been done in the United States. They closed this thing up in 1867. I don't know if you think this is funny, but I had the Smithsonian come over, and I said to him, "You've got to tell me that Abraham Lincoln had a meeting in this building because I'll need it for moments just like this." So they came in, and they're really nice people, and they said, he didn't. And I said, so I've got nothing. And they said, well, and of course, he was shot just a block and a half from here, and it's Killer Road right down the street here, but they said it had actually been started when he was alive, so he probably saw it going up. So that's all I have for you. But this is historically known as the Great Hall. It's the original convention center. And so the big meetings, I'm going to say the boys, which seems pretty inappropriate for today's meeting, but if you look at the pictures, they'd tie their horses up outside and come up here. President Grant was really the first president to use it. But the biggest meetings in that time in America's history were held at the White House and right here. I just say that because the meeting that we're having, I think, has as much importance as almost any topic that there is today and in the last 100 years. So maybe we can come up with some big things here that changes America and subsequently the world. Our founder is a guy named George Gallup, Dr. George Gallup, who was an academic from Iowa and went on to, Columbia and Northwestern and taught journalism. He was actually a psychologist by training. But he loved America and he loved democracy. He wasn't really a businessman or an entrepreneur. He was okay. He typically makes the list of 100 most influential Americans, the Atlantic list, not the, where it has Lincoln and Washington and Franklin. But he makes that real good list, not the one in Time magazine that has chefs and all that kind of thing. But he had a mission, which was, he was concerned that democracy would get rattly and fall apart. I don't know what he would think right now, but he said that, a great quote, if democracy is about the will of the people, somebody should go find out what that will is. His concern is that if leaders in Washington or leaders anywhere, whether it's Brussels, Geneva, London, it doesn't matter, but if they were wrong about what's on the minds of the people, when we go as leaders to make decisions about legislation, strategies, and plans, that when we're wrong about what's on their minds, the more we lead, the worse we make it. And so maybe one of the most important things, Guy, that we can do today is go through, and we've built consistent sampling frames across 160 countries. We've gone to women and asked them what is on their minds. Actually, all 5 billion adults in the world. But if we can sort through that in 2 quick hours and figure out what exactly is on their minds and be right about that, maybe nothing will serve this issue in the future of humankind more. And before I introduce my partner here, I wanted to make a statement. I don't know if this will come off right or not, but Guy and I were talking at breakfast. I think the biggest problem in the world, and we got so many of them, I mean, global warming and war and trade and whatever else. But if you look at, I'm a little concerned with Sir Angus here, but if you look at global GDP, and I think, Sir Angus, you're supposed to, with productivity, divide GDP per capita. That's one way to do it. But here in the United States, it's ground down to about 0. And you also could, at least in my limited world, say maybe human development is slowing down because so much of our life now is in the workplace. United States GDP per capita has been going down for 20 years. Not just Obama, not just Bush, not just the new guy, whatever else, but there's some really big force on it that's bigger than what happens in the White House. It needs a solution. I wonder, just as a concerned American, with that grinding down, can you lay a line of human development right across it? But we need a gigantic global intervention. But I get really excited because what could be a possible bigger global intervention than figuring out the role of women, what women want, what their will is, and how we can better deliver that. Because if we do, maybe that would be the biggest contribution that we could make. So with that, I want to say thank you to the ILO and all of our partners there, and I want to introduce you to my co-host, who I've known for a while. I don't know where people like Guy come from. He's dedicated his whole life to thinking about jobs, and I know he cares about jobs, and I know he cares about people, and I know he cares about humankind. And for being a global big shot, he's very warm. And when I sit with him, I think he even cares about me. But with that, please welcome my co-host today, Guy Ryder.
Jim, thank you very much indeed for that welcome. Thank you for your very challenging introduction, if I might say so. And let me say how pleased I am to be the second man to welcome you all to this event to mark International Women's Day. We're going to do better in terms of the composition of our panel. Let me just say a few words as to why I believe that the event today is extraordinarily important. The 8th of March is an important day in the calendar for the International Labour Organization. The 8th of March has a particular resonance because this day was born out of the struggle of working women and for women to find their place and equality in the world of work. And that struggle has been going on for more than 100 years, and our organization, the ILO, is approaching its 100th anniversary. One of the things which the International Labour Organization is mandated to do is to promote equality in the world of work. But over the 100 years of our history, we've seen a very interesting and actually very little commented upon evolution of our activities on issues of gender. If you look at our founding texts from 1919, it's all about protecting women. In the founding constitution of the ILO, women are sort of bracketed together with children, young people, a weak part of the workforce who have to be protected against all of the unpleasant things that could befall them if they go out to work. And over the years, we've seen that focus change. We're not talking about those things anymore, or not so much. We're talking now about promoting participation, and not just participation, but equal participation of women in the world of work. And There's a lot more that can and will be said, I think, in the panel and in the discussion today about how we are to bring that about. Now, as I've said, we're approaching our centenary. We've had to just take note of something which I would presume everybody in this room would subscribe to. And that is the fact that despite our efforts, when I say our efforts in the ILO, that means governments, workers and employers. And despite all of the formal commitments backed up by assumption of legal obligations through ILO conventions to the cause of equality at work, progress has been slow, glacially slow. That gender pay gap is still out there at 23% around the world. It's like on a Friday women come to work for free if you're still thinking in terms of that 5-day working week. Participation rates of women, 27 percentage points behind those of men. We're not getting there. And the question that we in the ILO asked ourselves is, what's wrong? Why, despite all of our efforts, are we simply not getting to where everybody has agreed we need to get? And that has led us to the conclusion that it won't be good enough just to carry on doing the same things, turning the volume up a bit, but doing the same things, of the things we've been doing for decades in respect of equality. There are some hidden reefs on the way. There are obstacles, structural, obstinate, that we don't seem able to overcome. And we have to identify those obstacles and we have to address them. And whilst the ILO knows, and we've got a pretty good sort of repository of statistics and data on the status of women at work, we realize that one thing we were somewhat short of was the actual reflection of the views of women at work, or women who want to be in work. And that was the genesis, Jim, of our cooperation and this remarkable project that we've undertaken together, where we've actually asked women what they think about their experience at work and what they want of their experience of work. And not only women, men as well. And I think that is an extremely important part of the project. Strikes me, and we'll talk about the evidence we've turned up in the survey, strikes me at a time when many people in public life, and many institutions of public life, are being taxed with being disconnected with ordinary people, not knowing what ordinary people really think. It was a pretty good idea to connect with working women and working men and find out what they want. It will be for my colleagues to bring to you the findings of our survey. But from the ILO perspective, as we move towards our centenary, and bearing in mind all of the important things that Jim says about a world of work which is undergoing transformative change, it's important that we use the knowledge that we have harvested from this survey, use it as a basis for action. This is not an academic exercise. It's an exercise which prepares us to clear out of the way those remaining obstacles that stand in the way of equality at work, one of our constitutional obligations, and I would echo Jim in saying one of the key societal challenges that we face with so many other in our contemporary world. So thank you for being here. I look forward to the discussion.
Good morning. Happy International Women's Day. Should try that again. Happy International Women's Day, everybody. Good morning. Okay. Thank you. Also, thank you to the two honorary women, Jim and Guy. Nice job there. I'm Femi Oke. I am your moderator for this morning. It is my great pleasure to be here. Question for you: how do you take a 220-page report and distill it into this beauty that you have on your seat, probably on your lap? How do you do it? Or more importantly, who could do that? Your presenters for the next part of our program. Neli Esipova is the Regional Research Director of the Gallup World Poll. And Susan Maybud is the Senior Gender Specialist at ILO. They got together 2 years ago for a massive brainstorm Not just them, many other people, but they're the people that you're going to see out here in just a moment. I was thinking, how do I introduce Neli? How do I introduce Susan? They've worked together so closely. I said to Neli, what would you say about Susan? She said, she's passionate, she's emotional, she gives 200%. I was like, that's pretty good. Susan, what would you say about Neli? Neli is one of my heroes, Susan says. She creates a narrative out of data and brings it to life. No pressure, Neli. No pressure, Susan. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and allow me to add my best wishes for a warm, happy, and joyous International Women's Day. I think this is when we get together, we take, whoops, there's action going on here, okay, where we take stock of what's been done, we celebrate the achievements, and we look to the way forward for everything else that is left to be done. So Femi actually put it very well. Yes, Neli is one of my heroes. She can not only make the data tell stories, she can make the data sing. So it's so important that we have her here from the Gallup side, kicking off the findings. So without any further ado, Neli, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susan. It was a big pleasure to work with you. And I want just to tell a few words about myself. I was born and lived for a long time in Russia. And in Russia, Women's Day, it's a national holiday. We never went to work. Men were giving us flowers and presents, even in a daycare, by the way. And when I moved to United States, I always miss this holiday. But I have to tell you what's happening today is better than holiday.
I think we'll ask the DG if we can have International Women's Day off. What do you think?
So just a few words about Gallup World Poll. We, starting from 2005, we go around the world and collect data. We talk to adults around the world. This year we collected data in 142 countries. We really go to people's homes. You can see one of our pictures. It's a house in Pakistan. And we talk to real people. And this is a picture from Chad. So this year we collected data in 142 countries, and results which you will see are based on conversations with nearly 149,000 people. So before we get into data which we collected together with ILO, I just want to bring to your attention a couple of things which we already knew. According to Gallup World Poll, if women in the workforce work in a full capacity, meaning they employed full-time for an employer or working part-time but do not want full-time, in this case they are more likely to rate their lives positively than those women who are not working in this type of jobs. And also, this positive effect on life evaluation is the same or even higher for women than it is for men in similar employment situations. So, what does it mean for us? It means that bringing women to workforce and letting them work at full capacity is not only good for society, it's good for us, for our well-being. At the same time, we know that women are continuing to be underrepresented in the workforce. Only half of the women, 50%, are in labor force, compared to 76% of men. And this gap between men and women range depending on the region from 11% to as high as over 50 percentage points for Southern Asia, Arab states, and Northern Africa, where women labor force participation ranges from 21 to 28% when men participation exceeds 70%.
Okay, now we're going to look at the questions that we posed together with Gallup in the World Poll, designed together with Gallup. The main question here is measuring women's and men's preferences. This is something that we did not have, and we knew it was a very important element. So we asked women, would you prefer to work at a paid job or stay at home and take care of your family and the housework? Or would you prefer to do both? Now, this question is actually very, very rich. Number one, let me clarify. Working a paid job does not mean working full-time. Staying at home means staying at home, but doing both doesn't necessarily mean part-time. A woman can be staying at home, but would prefer to be working full-time, and the other way around. Someone who's working full-time would rather be working part-time, you know, whatever. So it really does not categorize people in what they need to be looking at. Now, another point here is look at how we phrased, would you prefer to work at a paid job? We could have simply said, would you rather work or stay home? But actually, the ILO believes that work at home is work. It is unpaid work. But it is work. So we had to find a way of phrasing this that we do this concept justice. That was very important to us. Then, initially, we've asked this question to men. Would you like to work at a paid job, stay at home, or well? And when Gallup went through its rigorous field testing and cognitive interviews, we found that that question tanked. It did not resonate with men. It was like, well, what do you mean, stay at home? Of course, we're men. We have to go out and work. That's what we do. So we realized that wasn't going to work, but we made us think that actually this is really an opportunity to explore the mindsets of men about what do they think about women and work. So that's when we shifted the question around and we asked men, do you prefer that women in your family work at paid jobs, stay at home, or do both?
So, and here are our findings. Majority of both men and women worldwide would prefer women to work. 70% of women said that, and 66% of men. And both of these percentages are at least twice as high as percentages of people who prefer women to stay home and take care of the family. But what is more important is that this finding is true in all regions around the world, including regions where traditionally there is a low labor force participation rate for women. So how we came to this number, 70 and 66%? Let's look at the right side. 70% of women said they prefer to work. It's blue collar and green collar. 29% of them, blue collar, said we want to do only paid job. And 41% said that the green collar, they wanna do both, work and take care of the family. And orange color, 27%, it's women who want to stay home and take care of the family and not going to paid jobs. So and for men, percentages very similar. Susan, any observations based on this?
Thank you, Neli. Actually, this is a huge finding. The fact that men and women are tracking in their preferences for women to work. Who would have thought that? Well, we didn't think it when we went into actually asking these questions. So we're very, very pleased to see this result. It means that they're tracking at the household level. It means so that at that level, we have agreement. So what's holding women back? And this comes back to what the DG was asking. It must be something else. It must be the structural barriers. It's something else that we need to look at. So more on that later.
Let's look at women who are in the workforce. You can see that majority of women, vast majority, who are employed full-time for an employer or unemployed, they do want to work. Percentages for other employment categories can be a little bit different, but what all women in the workforce have in common, that more of them want to have both. Take care of family obligations and work. So it's 47% for employed full-time, 48% for unemployed. And here is even more interesting finding using Susan language, that's where our data starts singing. 58% of out of workforce women would like to work, and only 37% want to stay home and take care of the family. This data is really revealing if you think about that only half of women are in the workforce nowadays. So there is a big chance for these women to join if it's created. What's also interesting about this data is that younger women are more likely they want to join workforce. So for 15-29 years old women, it's 67%. But then percentage goes down, but it doesn't go below majority level until age of 65, basically retirement age. But even if women over 65 years old, 48% of them would like to join workforce. And of course, there are regional differences. And some regions stand out because of disconnect between women preferences and reality, and between women preferences and men preferences. So a couple examples for you. Central and Western Asia, region very close to my heart because a lot of countries in this region are from former Soviet Union. And you can see that 79% of women, 39 blue and 40 green, they would like to work. So this pattern might come from the time of history of former Soviet Union, when there was a heavy emphasis on giving women education and bringing them to workforce. But nowadays, only 44% of women in this region are in the workforce, while for men it's more than 70%. So this is the first disconnect. Second disconnect is only 19% of women want to stay at home and 33% of men. This probably reflects some cultural norms. But the biggest disconnect in the world is in Northern Africa. You can see that 67% of women would like to work. And if you remember the numbers I showed you a few slides before, in this region, only 23% of women are in the workforce, so huge disconnect. And also, 51% of men want women to stay at home. This is the highest percent in the world. And 32% of women would like to do it. Women in this region follow regular pattern like every woman in any other region. Younger you are, more likely you want to work. But men in this region do not follow regular men pattern. Younger men are, more likely they want women to stay at home. Something to think about.
Okay, thank you, Neli. Now, this is the second question that we posed, and it was about the acceptability of work for women. We asked, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? It is perfectly acceptable for any woman in your family to have a paid job outside the home if she wants one. Now, the if she wants one part is very important for us, because this is where you're looking at women's choice. If they want to stay home, that's one thing. They have many reasons for wanting to do that. But if they don't want to be staying home and they have to stay home, then we have a discriminatory problem that we have to look at. So that's quite important for us. A caveat on staying at home, we know that when this has become something long-term for women, that a woman stays home for a very, very long time, we have seen that it limits their opportunities to actually participate in the public sphere, to engage in their communities, to engage in governance of their countries. And so we often think that this is something to be considered as a measure depending on what the family's needs are and what the woman's needs are. Now, I'd like to draw your attention also to the word perfectly acceptable. We put the perfectly in there so that it would be really a binary choice. No ifs, buts, yes, maybe 3 times a week, or, only if the husband is sick or something. It was just like very clear that it's perfectly acceptable, yes or no. And the results are very revealing.
again, most of men and women find it's perfectly acceptable for women in their families to have paid job outside of home. Percentage is huge, 83% for women, 77% for men. But you can see, again, there is some little gap here. And this gap exists in all regions except a few, Northern America, all Europe, and Latin America. In these regions, over 90% of all men and women feel it's acceptable for women to work. In some regions, this gap is small, but there are regions with pretty sizable gap. Again, let's start with Northern Africa. 42% of men in Northern Africa think it is not acceptable for women to work. 20% of women believe so. Also, you can see that there is sizable gap in Arab states, Central and Western Asia, and Southern Eastern Asia in the Pacific. Susan, any observations?
Yes, thank you, because what we see here now is a consistency. You looked at the labor force participations for Northern Africa and Arab states, and women's participation was low. You look at the preference levels of women, they want to be working, and the men are voicing that they would rather that the women, they prefer that the women wouldn't work. And here we see the acceptability falling into place as well here. So there is a gender gap there that needs to be bridged so that women actually do find their voice and are more active in the workforce.
And now, in my opinion, it's one of our most important findings. So if it is acceptable at women's home that they work, then 77% of them want to work. If it is not acceptable for women to work, then 61% of them say, I prefer to stay at home. But nevertheless, there are still 36% of women in these families who would like to work.
Yeah, that was a bit of our sad slide. Now we're looking at the equal opportunity search for good jobs. The question we asked was this: if a woman has similar education and experience to a man, does she have a better opportunity, the same opportunity, or a worse opportunity to find a job in the city or area where you live? Now, what we're looking for is to see whether education and more women entering waged employment is in fact leveling the playing field. Or are there other elements at play here? What else is influencing the opportunities? And ideally, we would love to have full charts of similar opportunities, but Neli, you're going to walk us through that.
Yes, as Susan said, in ideal world, it would be nice to see 100% the same opportunity for both men and women. And hopefully, maybe we meet here in 5 years and that's what will happen. But for now, we have a little bit different picture. So again, men and women perception is very similar. But 39% of women, it's a green color, believes that women and men have the same opportunities. 25% blue color, it's a better opportunity, and 28% orange color believes that worse opportunity. One more interesting thing to mention is that more educated women are, more likely they to say they have worse opportunity.
And these findings baffled us, the one on the better opportunities. We know from our ILO labor data that women do not have better opportunities. We know from the school-to-work transition surveys for young women that we've conducted that they face many more obstacles than young men do. We also know from our enterprise research that, in fact, retention levels for women, promotion levels for women drop off. So where is this disconnect coming from, this between perception and reality? And we don't know the answers yet. We're going to go into it. But we do think that there is an element of more jobs being available in certain regions in lower paying female-dominated sectors, where there is, for example, in Asia, in export processing zones, in manufacturing, garment industry, in health services around the world, in care services. These are jobs that are dominated by women, and so maybe the perception there is that there are more opportunities in them. Okay, now, we're moving towards women and men who are employed. Before, the questions were general to all women and men, whether in employment or not. Here we're specifying of employed respondents, please think about what you earn at your job and how it contributes to your household's income. Would you say it is the main source, a significant source, or a small source of your household's income? Now, we know around the world that work is actually the biggest generator of income for families. We also know that women become more empowered and become economic actors in their families when they are working, when they're earning. So we were curious to see how this played out.
And here are our top level findings. More men than women consider themselves as main providers at home. So you can see 48% of working male said that they are contributing their income is the main source of household income, 26% for women. When it comes to significant source, it's the same percent, 30% for women, 30% for men, but you can look at a combined number, 56% of women, majority of women nevertheless do believe that they contribute is a significant or main source of household income. And the big differences in a small source group. Women are twice as likely as men think that they contribute only small portion of income. Two more things to mention. The gap between men and women decreases when education increases. And also the gap decreases for men and women who work full time for an employer.
Now, this is the crux of our findings. We absolutely love this. The biggest challenges for women in paid jobs. So again, we're looking at women in employment, and we ask both men and women, please think about women who work at paid jobs in your country or territory today. What do you think is the biggest challenge these women face? This was an open-ended question, unassisted. The answers came, they were coded into the themes that you see on the screen, they were bucketed, and here we get a lot of policy recommendations coming out.
So first of all, no difference between how men and women see the situation. Second thing is that we've shown you today so much data that you probably will not even be surprised with what we found, that the highest mentioned challenge was work and family balance. The second one is lack of affordable care for children and family. Third one is unfair treatment. And what's also interesting, so work and family balance came, if not the top one, but at least in one of the top challenges mentioned in every country around the world. And also, if we combine three categories, work and family balance, lack of affordable care, and lack of flexible hours, all these are related to balance aspect of work and family life, percent will be obviously even higher. And a couple regional examples. Northern America, top one, unequal pay, then work and family balance, then unfair treatment. What's important to note is unequal pay is a top mentioned in developed world in general. And sub-Saharan Africa, unfair treatment, top, then very close work-family balance, and then affordable care. And again, in developing world, unfair treatment comes as a top one. And now you have about 30 seconds to find your favorite country. Little hint, dark yellow, it's family balance, work balance. And while you are desperately looking for your favorite country, I want to just say a few more words. So challenges mentioned at the top change with circumstances. So younger women, 15 to 29 years old, they are more likely to mention unfair treatment, harassment, abuse. Women from 30 to 44 years old, lack of affordable care for children and family. Women 45 and older mention more often unequal pay. And if women are educated, highly educated, family-work balance, and unequal pay come at the top.
If we could just go back to the previous slide, Neli, on the care, on the elements there. There are some tremendous policy issues here and policy guidance. And I'm pleased to say, I'm relieved to say that the ILO has been working on these for years. And as the DG said, we now have to figure out how to work and make sure that we get heard even more. We have very strong conventions on maternity protection, on workers with family responsibilities. These are mainstays of our key equality conventions that we work with. We have excellent program and policy guidance on affordable childcare. And we work with partners. IFC is in the room here. We work with them very often on childcare provision as well. We are increasingly looking at elder care and long-term care. These are areas that are hugely important for us. And I'd like to also point out that it's a growth area as well. You have more and more jobs being created in care. This is extremely important because this is a world that needs jobs. And on top of it, it's not just in health services. It's also in early childhood education. It is, like we mentioned, long-term care. It is also in domestic work and provision of help at home. So these are areas that we need to be looking at in terms of growth. The other area of unequal pay, again, the ILO is the custodian to the only convention on equal pay. It is a huge area of work for us, and we know we have our work cut out. At this rate, if we continue at this glacial rate, as the DG was saying, it will take 70 years to close that gap. We've got to do things a bit differently on that. So this is one area to be looking at. And of course, discrimination, that's at the heart of our mandate. We have not only our conventions on discrimination, but everything we do, and not just discrimination on gender, but discrimination in general is very much part of what we do. Okay, now we want to leave you with a few takeaways. We're not calling them conclusions and recommend. A few takeaways from what you just heard. First of all, social norms and traditions are very important backdrops, but it is hugely important to challenge assumptions. I mean, if you look at what we found out about preference, acceptability, all of these point to that. So conventional wisdom may not be as conventional as we think, and it may be actually be a lot wiser than we think. So we have to keep our ear to the ground on that. Structural barriers need to be challenged, and a lot of these barriers are encrusted in systems that are actually not serving our new economic models. So we need to sweep those away, and we need to be looking at family-friendly measures for both women and men. We need to be looking at equal pay. We need to be looking at the insidious discrimination that creeps into the workplace and how to tackle that. And then, of course, we can't do it alone. We need a multifaceted approach with multiple partners, multiple actors. We need to have a well-balanced mix of policies and processes to influence lifting these barriers. And we need to do it fast. If we want to succeed by 2030 in truly transforming our world according to the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got to speed things up very, very quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it just remains for us to thank you very much for your attention, for being here. And we pass the floor to our moderator, Femi.
Nice work, ladies. I don't know if you could hear the sounds from the audience, but they were like, what? Yes. There was a lot of feedback. We will be doing a little bit later. What's not on the program is you, ladies and gentlemen, but we will have your questions, your comments, not only for Susan and for Neli, but also for our panel who are about to come on stage. Good morning, panel. Take a seat. Any time now would be great. It takes about 20 seconds to walk on the stage of applause. Let's try it. Very good. Keep it going. So everybody is seated. Good morning. Sir Angus.
That's it.
Excellent. What a fine-looking panel. It did get me wondering what it was in their resume, their biography, that made them so important that they could sit here on this stage. Sheila Lero Marcello is the founder and chairperson and CEO of Care.com. Sheila, do a humble brag. What from your life, your experience, your biography is relevant to this conversation today?
Femi, thank you for having me here. I mean, really, I'm super excited. Thank you for the invitation. It's 2 words, passion, and as Guy also said, it's impact. So let me go back to passion. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I came here for college. I got pregnant at a very young age. And my husband and I struggled for care to find solutions as we went through our careers, grad school, and everything. So I am just so completely devoted to try and figure out solutions here. With regards to impact and moving to solutions, we are now in 19 countries serving 22 million members. And I don't know if you know anything about Care.com, we help families find affordable care solutions. One of the problems that you saw up there. What makes us very unique, though, is that there is this codependency between care and jobs. You need great care to work, and you need to work to pay for great care. And it's so part and parcel in improving female participation in the workplace. It's a unique situation because we're not only helping women get to work that drives economic growth, we're also helping find women jobs because the fastest growing job category happens to also be care. So a combination of passion and impact is why I'm here today.
You can stay. Activist, businesswoman, producer, director, actor Eva Longoria. What on earth are you doing here today?
Yeah, I am here because I'm a woman. And I think that so many times when we have these conversations, it's a male-dominated conversation. We see that in our politics, women underrepresented in politics making decisions about our healthcare, our pay, and I have an experience. I have an experience in this world as a woman. And I think oftentimes I've spent my life, I'm not an expert like Sir Angus, but I am literate on the topic. And I think that a common mistake we make is speaking for women, speaking for a community, as a Latino, speaking for the Latino community, and we have to make sure we don't do that. What I spend my life doing is making sure these communities speak for themselves. And that's really what's the best thing about this particular study, is that this is about voices around the world. It's putting human stories behind the statistics, because you can't really understand an issue or a problem in the world without humanizing it. And I think these findings should be applauded, but also challenged and criticized, good and bad, and looked at. And I think that's why I'm here. That's why you're here. That's why we're wearing red. That's why we're all here to kind of take this momentum of what's happening with women, not only in the United States, but in the country, and turn it into something. It's not just a day today, it's a movement. And what is that movement gonna produce?
Did you notice that Sheila was already making notes? What could you possibly be writing down right now?
She's writing down how amazing I am.
You know what's so amazing?
I see it. I can see it from here. Eva is
Femi, when you, yes, that was definitely something I wrote down, even when I first met her. But Femi, when you went upstage and you introduced Susan and the woman who did all the study for Gallup, they really, there was a warmth that you made that introduction. And I wrote down what Eva just said is human beings. That this is all about, I know it's all statistics and it's all about jobs, but it's about the human side of everything that we do. And this is just, that's what I wrote down.
Mm-hmm. So Angus Deaton is a Princeton University Professor Emeritus and a 2015 Nobel winner in economic sciences. I am a bold person to ask him, how qualified is he to be on this stage? But am I to be on this stage? Sir Angus, what from your resume,
your CV would you like to flaunt at us that makes you relevant for today?
Well, you know, I was thinking about that, and maybe the first thing on my resume is my name. And, you know, in America, people are not called Angus. And so I'm very frequently addressed as Miss Agnes Deaton. So I thought maybe that's why I'm here today. I'm one of these transgender people. More seriously, really two things. I've spent a lot of my life working with survey data, and so I have a huge attachment to these questionnaires that actually ask people, find out from people what's actually going on in their lives, as opposed to having a bunch of experts impose their beliefs on the way people ought to be behaving or what they should be doing. Of course, the experts will come along and do that after they see the data, but nevertheless, the data puts some constraint on that thing. And in particular, I've been associated with Gallup really since the World Poll started in 2006, more than 10 years ago now. And as you all saw today, and for me this is just an amazing thing, that we don't really have any world data infrastructure that looks like this. I mean, a systematic survey that is the same all around the world. And I think Gallup has done just a fantastic job in making that available, and it can address issues like this and other issues too. And Jim Clifton's one of my heroes for getting that started more than 10 years ago. And then just about myself, I have spent a lot of my life professionally trying to find out what goes on inside a household. Because most of our surveys ask, not like this survey, but many surveys ask, you know, what happens to this household as a whole, all these people. And these surveys are not very good at getting into what's going on within the household. And actually, I've spent a lot of my life trying to find ways, like with an oyster knife, as it were, of trying to open up that shell and try to find out what's going on in there and who gets what within the household. We know how much the household spends, but we don't really know whether it's equally allocated within the household, you know, whether women get different things than men, get more than men, whether elderly people get less than younger people, men get more than women, children, you know, all that sort of stuff. And that's actually quite remarkably hard to do. And I was stunned when the Nobel Prize was announced. There was a press conference, which was 20 minutes after I found out that this has happened. And the first question I was asked was about the work I'd done on gender discrimination. That was from the floor, not really, but it's in the citations. So I can actually document on my CV this work I did on gender discrimination, and it's recognized there by the Nobel Committee. So I'm well qualified, thank you.
Definitely stay. Guy, I want you to work harder because of course you're going to be up here on the stage, but what story are you going to tell us, or an example that makes us really connect with why you're here?
Well, I bring one thing to this panel, which is overwhelming and outstanding ordinariness. I come from a very ordinary approach on this. I came from a household where Northern England, industrial town, my father went to work, my mother didn't, or worked part-time. Never thought about these issues. It was just in the natural order that was how things were. And if Sir Angus prized open my household with his oyster knife there, I think he would have moved on very quickly because you would have found a very tedious and boring situation. But then moving on from that ordinariness and frankly a lack of questioning, a lack of thinking, which I think was quite generalized in the 70s, 20 or 30 years in the labour movement, which began to take these issues seriously, to say there's something wrong here. Mm-hmm. As a matter of social justice, I mean, women's disadvantages in the world of work began to be recognized and addressed as a problem. And we've moved on a long way from that. And now, doing the job I do right now, it seems to me, and the survey findings absolutely confirm that belief, you know, if we are serious about moving social justice forward in the world, we cannot do that unless we start to deal with the issues of participation, not just participation of women in the world of work, but the terms upon which they participate in the world of work. And there's a lot of issues around vulnerable employment, labour market segregation, which I think we need to pursue further as we move forward. So I bring the ordinary man's views to these issues.
Very nice. Eva.
What am I writing? I've had the opposite growing up of Guy. I grew up in a family where I had 9 aunts, 3 sisters, 22 female cousins. So I come from a long line of working women. And I also come from a family of educators. I was the last person in my family to get a master's degree. And I remember I was on Desperate Housewives and they were like, yeah, okay, great. When are you getting your master's degree? So I'm the underachiever in my family. And I was lucky because they equated education with economic mobility. And I know that the gender wage gap cannot be solely described by differences in education, because as we've seen, even when we have the same degree, we have the same level of education, we still earn less. Women still earn less. But if we're going to have the conversation today, we have to really talk about not only access to equal employment and equal jobs, but access to equal and quality education. And that is a problem worldwide.
Sheila, you're nodding. Share the nod with us. What's going on?
I didn't ever realize I'd get cold call on a panel. So I love it though. Went to law school and I'm like loving it. So I just wrote down 79 cents on the dollar to a man's dollar in the United States, even though 50% of women work. We at Care.com, we're leading 28 companies signed the Equal Pay Pledge. And I think companies need to play a bigger role. That's what I was writing down to make a real difference here. And that includes paid leave. Unfortunately, we're in the United States, the only country, along with Papua New Guinea, who hasn't passed paid leave. And it's a shame. And so I was just writing down overall our corporate responsibilities to make a difference for women.
Jimmy's going to have the best story ever because he's had to wait a while. Why are you here, Jim?
It's building.
We kind of caught, I don't know, why am I here? If I would have known you were going to ask me that question, I wouldn't be here. I'm not an expert on this subject, and I can tell very quickly that Eva and Sheila are very good on this subject. I do want you to know that for 40 years I've been showing up places all over the world where I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm actually very comfortable in this role right now. If that makes there's no problem. I think I'm just a representative here for our group. Faith asked me if I would be on the panel, and I said, I'm not sure I have that. I don't have credentials. I don't have that much to offer. And I said, what would I do? And she said that we need kind of an old, out-of-touch white guy. And I said, well, then I'm your guy.
An important demographic.
Femi, can I just do a little plug for him? So in the report, right, Jim basically says, failing to maximize women's talent to lead, manage and build stunts global economic growth and fails humankind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We need more male feminists.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're looking at me. I'm not really a male feminist, but I just want to tell you something. I'm for the world working out and economic energy coming back and all that. But one of the most unbelievable discoveries I've seen to come out of Gallup Labs is that we have so many tens of millions of interviews on managers and women and leaders. A good question is, were men and women born equally in their ability to lead and manage? Because for some reason, everywhere you go, men run everything. The question is, could women? But do they have the natural God-given traits that men do? The answer is exactly the same. Now, you say, well, it couldn't come out exactly the same. Actually, as managers, so in a country like this, there's 100 million full-time employees, which means there's about 10 million managers. There's 10 employees to that. And 70% of the managers that manage America are awful managers. They do a terrible job. When they manage a team, the team gets worse. But I've always wondered, and I'm just talking kind of, Sir Angus, mathematically here. I love women and I love people and all that kind of stuff. But what you'd like is to fix the economy. But since men and women were born equally to be managers or leaders, there's probably a great big lift up we could make. Women, I told a Saudi audience this one time, I had to get the hell out of there, but women are actually slightly better at managing than men. Slightly better. They're a little better at nurturing, they're a little better at development. Not enough to choose the woman. If you have a man and a woman sitting in front of you, it doesn't mean choose the woman.
Why not?
But it means that you have at least exactly the same God-given traits sitting in
Jim,
front of you.
why
Almost
wouldn't-
nobody knows that.
If someone was slightly better, why wouldn't you choose the slightly better person?
Because the traits of the individual overpower that little bitty difference in front of you. So it'd be better to find out if you have a real manager in front of you, or if you have an enormous individual achiever,
Right.
if you have somebody that would be a great teacher versus a great salesperson or whatever. It's better to go to that. But the people in front of you, as far as just normative data, they're equal.
Right. Let me just circle back to our ILO Gallup report. Sir Angus, are you shockable at this stage? Can you see report findings and then think, I wasn't expecting that?
No, I don't think that. I mean, I've thought about these things for quite a long time, and there's nothing that really shocked me. Some of the findings are very notable, and it's very good to have them because, you know, you expect them, but you don't get them from the whole thing. I mean, you don't get them from the data that we had available. So this adds a lot to what we know, and I think it's a terrific thing that it was done. One of the things that I was not that surprised to see, but I think may surprise some people, is this sense there's not these huge differences between men and women in their attitudes towards those things. So what you find is the men support it sort of where the women support it, and where the men don't support it, the women don't support it either. And that, brings two thoughts to mind. One is this thing that Amartya Sen has written about over the years, which is this idea of false consciousness. He didn't invent the term false consciousness, but I mean the sense that, if you're going to oppress people, you have to enlist them in their own oppression. And you see a lot of that around the world. So many of these women, just because they agree with the men, doesn't mean in a better world they would necessarily agree with the men. I mean, in that, this is part of the way they were taught to believe, and they will enforce it for the next generation, which is one of the reasons this takes such a long time to close. So that, I think, is a very important part of it. The other thing it suggests is there's a social reality outside of the families, which is causing the similar set of attitudes. In some sense, it's functional. It does something for the society. Now, again, you have to be very careful of these functional arguments because something that could have been functional 40 years ago may not be functional today. And Susan talked about that. I mean, the world of work is changing, and we're not necessarily matching those things to the world of work, as it were. But, there are some outside things that have changed that are really incredibly important. So I may get the dates wrong on this, but I think over the last 50 years, the total fertility rate, if you regard that across country, so the total fertility rate is the number of children a woman would expect to have throughout her life. 40 years ago, there were 100 countries where that was 6 or larger, meaning on average, many women had more and some women had less, but on average, women were giving birth to 6 children, all right? There are only 7 countries in the world now where that total fertility rate is over 6. So that means women are no longer spending all of their lives in this reproductive cycle, which is also incredibly risky, apart from anything else. It's risky to their own health. It's risky to the children's health if you have lots of children, especially if they're not very well spaced. And so, the healthier environment today and better vaccination and cleaner water and so on has meant that women don't need to have as many children in order to have the same number of surviving children. And that has liberated women to move into the world of work in a way that really wasn't there before. And I think it's those deeper forces which change only very slowly because, when people's attitudes and religious beliefs and everything else are tied up in this function of a world in which children die and, every woman is having 6 children. It takes a long time for that to ease
So,
away,
Angus,
but that's an important force that's helped see what we're seeing
I
today.
understand that, and Guy was saying, but this is glacially slow. Are you saying, Angus, it's going to take generations, regardless of having a fine report like this one, and data that is fresh and interesting and encouraging, it's still going to take generations? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's slow. I hate to predict
Glacially
the future.
slow.
It's very difficult. Glacially is a big word. And, even if you look around what's happening in the US today, these worlds of work are changing very rapidly. I mean, part of the debate about technology and robots taking over is that we can think there'll be lots of jobs in the future, but most of those jobs are jobs that today are classified as women's jobs. I mean, this is sort of a different dimension altogether, and it's the men who are being threatened by these jobs. That's not what's happening around the world
Guy
yet.
looks a little bit depressed about this.
It's really interesting. I understand, and I think the survey brings out the importance of attitudes and norms, surely. But I think it would be disappointing, and I would even go so far to say as an abdication of what we're here to do, to say we will only move as fast, or we can only hope to move as fast as attitudes can evolve. I think we have to actually lead in that regard and help attitudes to move more quickly. Now, I do think the fact that the world of work is undergoing, I said it in my introduction, transformative changes which come from technology, they come from demography, they come from all sorts of things, gives us an opportunity, because the one thing, and I would agree, I'm not particularly shocked by anything I see in this report, but some things stand out. And the one thing that for me stands out above anything else is the absolutely crucial importance of the work family, the work-life balance. I mean, if we were able to get to that one, we'd be going an awful long way. And I think the question that I ask myself coming out of this exercise is, okay, how are we going to address that? What would it take? What does it mean? Is it the care economy? What is it? And how are we going to finance it? I mean, there's a massive opportunity there, but we know at the moment we're doing a very bad job, frankly, in providing necessary and financing necessary social care as it exists today. I was surprised by the fact that equal pay only came out sort of top of the challenges in the developed countries. It was quite instructive to me. I was genuinely, this is where I got the nearest to being shocked, by the fact that non-availability of well-paying jobs figures so lowly on the priority scale of challenges. In a world where, we know that we have over 200 million unemployed, I was expecting that to figure more prominently. But this is perhaps a layering of causes. People get to the first problem and cite that. If they went further from that, they might get to the other problems. But I think that, the work-life balancing is so obviously the big story here. It's something the ILO began to work on in the 1980s. Our convention around work-life balance, workers with family responsibilities, Susan mentioned it, dates back to 1981. That's when we first started to think about those things, really. Remains relatively little ratified by member states, which is perhaps another point. We've understood it, but probably we're not taking the action that we should be on these areas.
I guess I've been thinking about what Sir Angus said and Guy just mentioned, how we have to wait for things to catch up with regards to demographic shifts, and then what roles do we have to find solutions and hope that we do that faster. But what's interesting is I observed Japan, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in Japan. They've got a real crisis problem in senior care. Low birth rates, as Sir Angus pointed out, and some provinces are even north of 60% that are 65 years or older, as a lot of young people are moving to the cities. And also what they're finding is that women are deciding not to get married, not just to not have children. And in the traditional setting, women were the caregivers, the daughter-in-laws. So what are single men now going to do with regards to senior care? They actually are being forced to think about it, to participate, to change social norms and behaviors of how they think about care, how they think about women working, and that one of the most isolationist country in the world is opening its borders to attract caregivers to come in to help them solve their problem. A good friend of mine, Kathy Matsui, wrote a seminal paper on womenomics over a couple of decades ago that now Prime Minister Abe is calling Abenomics. to try and drive female participation in the workplace. So I think with desperation, we're going to find countries reacting to the demographic problems ahead of them to then find solutions that government cannot turn away, or corporations, to figure out solutions.
I don't want to be misunderstood. I think it's very important to understand the deep forces, but the deep forces are not where you stop. So I'm with you. And I think, activism is an incredibly important part of this. One word that came up many times in the presentation, and Guy talked about it too, is the word we. We have to do this. Well, that we should always appear in about 6 quotes. I mean, who is we here, and who put us in charge of doing this, for instance? And I'm a great believer in democratic discussion and democratic activism on the ground. And what the attitudes that have to change are the attitudes, people have to realize they're being oppressed. I mean, and that can sort of be done from the outside, but a lot of it has to come from within, and it has to come from the voices we're hearing here of people who are prepared to lead, and especially women who are prepared to lead, and who are going to really help make a difference here. So I think, it's very important to be aware of these deep forces. Yes. Otherwise, you get into this Pollyannish land where you say, oh, we have to tell people and they'll be free. Well, it's not as easy as that.
Yeah.
So you really can't do that. On the other hand, it's not true that you can't do nothing. One of the things you're probably unconscious of is that we've started switching from work-family balance to work-life balance. That's actually a very important distinction, right?
It is, yeah.
Because so many people actually don't have kids anymore. And that's part of the deep forces actually affecting our rhetoric. And the rhetoric matters.
Yeah, and I think, not only do attitudes have to change, but the institutional constraints have to be changed as well. I mean, we have to have a more family-supported policy, not only in the United States, obviously worldwide, to reconcile work with family balance. And I think that, 100 years ago when women were having 6 kids is because a lot of them didn't have the choice of family planning, right? And today we do. And so today women don't have to choose between their productive roles and their reproductive roles. And I think, today, and I always say this about Breast Cancer Awareness Month, when the pink's everywhere and there's pink, and I go, we're aware, but what are we doing? Right? And so today is not about getting the message out. It's not about, we got to make people aware of this study. We got to get the message into the hearts of sons and fathers and brothers, and into the minds of the politicians who can change the institutional constraints.
I'm going to make a reckless remark here.
Oh gosh, okay.
People of my ilk aren't very excited about policies and rules. Just saying. But there are certain things that we can do that I think are much more powerful than policies and rules, and just stay with me, where you can get sudden change. I'll just, here at Gallup, a long time ago I started a market research company with another guy, doesn't matter, 40 years ago. We built an all-man's company. I didn't mean, we just had an all-man's company. Somebody along the way said, you need some women? I put some token women in it, I mean token. One of the cruelest things you can do as a leader is put people in token positions. But I can tell you, I could not get women to work. And I don't know, some of the women that work here will laugh when they say this, but I'm a Nebraska hillbilly. Until one of our top 3 executives became a woman. So the top 3 executives are CEO, CFO, and COO. Our COO became a woman. She just got the job because she's a killer. Like that, we turned into an all-women's company. There's a joke around Gallup. We have this beautiful thing out on the Missouri River. It's a 50-acre campus, big lawns. It's a power thing. That's where our COO is. And I walked into this kind of James Bond room. She was sitting at the end of it, a bunch of women around it, maybe 3 guys. And I was being good old Jim. And I said, hey, what's going on in here? And she says, with no grin or anything, these are the people that run Gallup. And I said, what do I do? And she said, you are now the token. But what happens is, if you said, I want to take advantage of putting women, I would say you'll never do it. Oh, by the way, if you go out there, there's what many people have called, our pal Danny Kahneman said, it's the greatest daycare center in the world. But everything's a utopia. I mean, it's like kind of like a central casting. It's a place where women are taken around, have their baby. I mean, it's like a movie, but it's not. Most movies aren't true, but this actually is true. But only women can do this. I want to say one other thing. Gallup's value and everything else is through the roof. I mean, we're an incredibly valuable company and all that. But if you said to boards of directors, if you want to increase the value of your company, let me see the top 3 people. And if I was a board member, I would say, who's your CEO, your COO, and just make one of them a woman. Doesn't matter which one, and everything will change. You don't need policies, you don't need things about work-life balance or anything else. It's all coming like a tsunami. It's unstoppable. I've been kind of driven out of the company, which sounds funny, but I actually kind of like it. I thought that would be funnier than it was.
Jim, that is...
But I want to tell you one other thing too.
They were laughing inside.
But tomorrow, I have a meeting over at General Dynamics. Nothing I'm telling you is a secret. But you know what that is? It's a massive defense contractor. I like going. You know, they make stuff that can like blow the whole world up in the first 20 minutes of war. And these are run by the most macho men warriors in the world. So my chief of staff and I are working on this, and it's, I'm going to see women. I'm pretty surprised. So they said, well, this one just got promoted here, this one will be here. But I'm not seeing the CEO, but a group of them. But I was wondering who he is that has all these women. Do you see what I said, who he is? So I said, who's the guy that runs General Dynamics? The guy that runs General Dynamics' name is Phoebe. Phoebe runs one of the biggest war machines in the world, but the same thing happened, like a magic trick. I was, over at Red Cross. They'd never made a woman chairman of Red Cross. They did. Bonnie McElvey Hunter, one of the greatest women in the world, just a killer, but Horatio Alger winner and everything else. And then everything changes. Mm-hmm. But the organizations always go up when they do that. But you say, how do you get there? Let's have some policies don't work. If you're a board member, I'm a board member on some place, I always say, let me see your top 3 people. Make one of them a woman, and productivity always goes up. And you say, why should I do it? Should I do it for the good of humankind? You could. Or you could do it just because you want to make more money. You can do either one.
Be thinking about your questions. In the next 5 minutes, I'm going to get you in this conversation. We have a microphone in that aisle and a microphone in that aisle. Don't be shy and start standing there. And the minute you start standing there, you will be in this conversation as well. Thinking about attitudes, Eva, as we were watching the presentation, you nudged me when Latin America popped up. Mm-hmm. What was that nudge about? Share it.
When listening to the report and reading it, people probably would be surprised in a machismo countries like Latin America that there was a high percentage of acceptability for women in the workplace. And I've traveled a lot to Central America and South America. I work with farm workers a lot. So I've done 2 documentaries about them, and so I've spoken to them a lot. And it's not surprising that men support women in the workplace in Latin American countries. Oftentimes, it's not only supported, it's demanded, and not only demanded of the moms, but of the kids. And the problem with that is there's a trade-off for low wages for today in exchange for long-term economic mobility, because these kids are now not in schools and they're not going to schools. So I think that, according to the study, we saw that the gender gap shrinks with education. The higher the education level, the higher the income to your household. The other thing that you have to be careful about Latin America is vulnerable employment. So the quantity may be high. There's a lot of women working, wow, but is it safe? Is Latin American progressive, but do they have safe transportation to and from work? Are they susceptible to exploitation and lower wages? Are they experiencing harassment, even sexual harassment? And so the region in Latin America needs to capitalize on the Latin American woman's desire and ambition and drive to work, but we have to make sure that the infrastructure is there to access quality, safe work.
Can I follow through on that one? Because I think this is really, really important. First thing to say is nobody wants kids at work. You know, there are 168 million kids in the world of work undergoing child labour. We're doing our best to make sure that that comes to an end, and that might sound self-evident, but there is a sort of a contrary line of thought, which is actually, you know, kids at work is actually a good and natural part of development processes. We're actually seeing that coming out of Bolivia, writ very large at the moment. But the other point is, relating much more directly to gender questions, you know, high levels of women's participation, where it is a reflection of a fairly harsh reality, that it's not an option to be out of the labour force because dire necessity and poverty, you know, drives you into the labour force. It requires you to work. Well, that can hide some pretty grim realities, and we do make the point. Eva's used the phrase of vulnerable employment, and we use that to refer to family contributors. You know, women who are, you know, often, for example, contributing to subsistence farming operations. They can be working in extraordinarily harsh and difficult circumstances. And that stands some way away from the things we're working towards. The informal economy, where women are heavily concentrated as well, would be another example. So it reverts to what I tried to say earlier on. It's the terms upon which women find their place in the world of work that I think we need to be
And it's not only
attentive to.
Latin America, and it's not only underdeveloped countries, it's in the United States. In the United States, in Florida, we in MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Educational Fund, had a lawsuit a couple years ago of slavery. People chained in the fields. There was 8 women pregnant by the same man. I mean, that's today in America, in our backyard. And so we have to be careful that it's not that problem over there, it's here.
Absolutely.
You know?
Guy, I'm just thinking about some parts of this report that actually are quite uncomfortable data. So North Africa popped up at one stage, and there was this huge difference between what the women wanted and what the men wanted. And it's uncomfortable because it was so bigger than any other region. How do you deal with that? How do you unpack that? Because there's so much that you could say, well, is it cultural? Is it because they're in transition and they don't want women to do well? They don't want women to be educated? I mean, there's so many things there. When you're presenting data and it's uncomfortable, what do you do with that?
Yeah, there are 3 areas of disconnect which I found notable, to use Sir Angus's word, in the report. One is where the views of men and women are different. By the way, there's a surprisingly and pleasingly high alignment on many of the key issues, but there are differences. So the men and women disconnect. Second is a disconnection between perceptions of what we think is reality, and we saw that on opportunities for women, where perceptions are more positive than what we believe the reality to be. And the third disconnect is between what people want and what they have. And North Africa actually brings out some of those disconnections quite starkly. I think it takes us straight back to where we were talking earlier on about attitudes. I think the North African situation is about attitude and norms. I think the most alarming thing about that metric is that younger men seem to have more negative attitudes towards women in work than older ones. It would seem to be an indication that the dynamic is working in the wrong direction. Well, we know what's going on in that part of the world. I mean, we're not entirely surprised by it, but we should be alarmed by it and worried by it, it seems to me. But again, it's not, in my view at least, I think, you know, I come from a values-led organisation which has very clearly established what it thinks is the right thing to do on these issues, and we cannot be deflected by this sort of cultural relativism around what are basic rights issues. Very easy to say in a room like this. It's much more difficult to actually act upon.
Did you say that in Morocco?
In Morocco, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. There's some other places
Mali?
which we won't mention, which might be more difficult.
We're not going to do the whole geography of North Africa, but I hear you. All right, the conversation is about to get a whole lot bigger. Don't forget you have your panel here, but we also have Susan and Neli who did the report presentation as well. Let me start on that side of the room with that microphone. Just one rule, keep it on topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Helen Holton. I'm the Executive Director of the National Organization of Black County Officials. And I found Ms. Longoria's comment regarding the relationship of education and economic mobility quite profound in the face of this report. As an African-American woman in America, from a family anchored in education as the key to move forward, how does the report, and maybe it doesn't, drill down to the differences in America racially? Because all the education in the world still is not going to allow you to reach certain economic plateaus in America. And it is a real reality that is creating a greater divide in economic opportunity in what is known to be the free country, the leader of the world. And so we face these issues domestically. I am ecstatic about this report, but when I look at men and women sharing the same views, I must say that with more women voting, more women participating in the economy, and yet more men leading, the decisions that are impacting the quality of life, how do you take this data from the report and begin to move forward to reaching a goal of equality in 2030?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna share that question because
Yeah.
you can have your take,
Yeah.
and then we'll have Susan's.
Yeah, because I would love
Right?
to ask them as well
Yeah.
the same question, because this was a global report. A lot of my knowledge about education is about the United States and the intersectionality of race and gender. In my case, I'm a woman and a Latina, and then you add socioeconomic status on top of that, and then you have a triple whammy of disparity. My foundation focuses on Latinas because even though ethnic women in the United States are making progress with the wage gap, the ones who hurt the most are Latinas, making 58 cents to the dollar, and African American women who are making 65 cents to the dollar, where white women make 82 cents per the dollar. So it is women of color who are still not at parity, not even with women, right? So there is that layers of oppression. And I want to ask you guys what you found there. It's harder in other countries because I know in Mexico too, there's not a racism problem because everybody's Mexican. I mean, there are some indigenous tribes that there is some racism, but in most totality, it's a socioeconomic or a classism in Mexico. But I don't know how you guys address that.
I want to ask a question. Specific question about if we ask about race in the United States. In this particular study, we did not. In this particular study, so we cannot differentiate people by that.
All right, thank you. Next question on this side of the room.
So the question goes back actually to the folks who presented the data. Very interested in, and I thought it was shocking actually that you didn't present the data on the question, that the same question asked of the men about whether they would prefer to work, stay at home, if you will, or both, because that in itself seems indicative of attitudes that persist about the fact that women have to take care of all the family stuff. So did you actually stop asking the question? Did you not ask the question? Or are the results just so dismal that you didn't present them? And then, then past that, back to the panel, kind of what implications does
Let's
that
take one
have?
at a time so we don't forget the second question.
Sure.
Okay, Susan.
Okay, thank you for that. Actually, we did not ask the question once the cognitive interviews came in and the field testing was done, because we realized the question did not work. It worked in a handful of countries in Europe, the United States, but it's not a question that works globally. Now, you may think that this is perpetuating the patriarchy, that women are going to be doing all that. That was not the reason for the question. The reason we asked men is to understand where the blockages are and what we need to work on in order to overcome and change their mindsets. And actually, we're quite surprised because they were very close in their preference for women to be working at paid jobs or doing both. So we're actually quite pleased that we turned this around, because the other way would not have given us anything very much that we could work with. it would have been like 90% in the world, 99% would be saying we want to be working outside the home. Now, this is an assumption, I agree, but it's based on the fact that we tested it. This was not something that we didn't test.
Panel, I know you're writing a few notes down. What did you want to add? Sheila?
I didn't have
Guy?
anything to add specifically.
Very good. I feel like there's so many people waiting that you need to go to the back of that line and then come back again if you want that second question. Otherwise, everyone will have 2 questions. Good one. Thank you very much. Hello.
Anissa, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Anissa. I'm a workplace strategist based out of Seattle. So I spend a lot of time looking at work in tech. My question, we've talked a lot about corporate employment and the structural barriers within work as we know it today, the pay gap, flexible hours, things like that, and bias. I'm also curious about when you overlay technology with that, automation, a smaller pie for how much work there is going forward, and the kind of work, which is in tech, which is pretty rapidly growing. We also see entrepreneurship and opportunities for women not to work for someone else under some of those barriers, but to kind of pave their own path. And I'm curious for the panel and the presenters, what you see as the barriers and opportunities in terms of women starting their own businesses. Thank you.
Ooh, who wants to handle that on the panel?
Well, it's funny because that's what my foundation is about. We support Latina entrepreneurs and giving them access not only to higher education, but to capital. And to business training so that they can start their own businesses. In the United States, Latinas start businesses 6 times the national average. Minorities start businesses more than the national average. So when you talk about job creation or the growth of the economy, that's in job creation, and small businesses account for most of those new jobs. And you talk about STEM, my thesis was on STEM, and you look at every STEM graduate that comes out of college, there's 2 jobs waiting for them, okay? So, but women are underrepresented in these fields. And it's not because they're not interested in these subjects, but it's because they are pushed out, whether it is early education and they're not getting into the math and science fields, but definitely in higher education. I interviewed 20 professional STEM women in my thesis, and all of them experienced sexism in college, and being, again, a second layer of oppression. Being a minority, they experienced a lot of racism as well. And so to get through that, then they get into the workplace, and the infrastructure is not set up for them to have a family-friendly or even just to have women in the conversation. And so there's definitely so much opportunity for women in STEM fields. There's a video, you have to go to my Instagram page today because there's a video I just posted, and it's little girls, and they said, name an inventor. They go, Benjamin Franklin and Nicholas Tesla, and they name all of these men, and the interviewer says, name some female inventors, and not one little girl could name a female inventor. And the video shows everything that these women inventors have invented, the bulletproof material, cataract surgery, so many important things. And you go, why aren't little girls learning about those women in schools? It's not just Benjamin Franklin.
So answer that question also in another perspective where we see the future of work eliminating a lot of jobs, and I think we touched on this as well. And yet we view caregiving jobs, which is the fastest growing job category that is expected, in a way that we look down upon it. The same, I think, struggle that teachers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s had to struggle to really, how do you represent this as a professional job that in fact everyone in society will depend on? So with automation and machine learning, a lot of other jobs will go away, but why don't we figure out how do we professionalize jobs? So here at care.com, we look at, I remember raising with my board a conversation that I wanted to meet Mary Kay at SEIU. And of course, my board member said to me, that's strange. Why would a public company go talk to the union? And I said, it's interesting that an Uber and Lyft have the DMV that is federally funded, state supported, that trains, that vets great drivers, right? that we all can benefit from to provide as a service, but there is not an institution for training caregivers, yet there will be 117 million families who are going to be dependent on certified nursing assistants, and we have 5 million in this country. Why aren't we investing in these jobs and professionalizing them?
To Eva's point, the number of full-time jobs in America as a percent of the adult population is the lowest it's been in 50 years. So when you read the 5%, it's pretty misleading, right? Of the 10 million jobs created since the recession, 94% of them are part-time or temporary. Do you see the problem? So we had this huge wipeout of the jobs we all want. And there's an invisible man or woman in there, let's just say woman, who may have had a job for $60,000, which puts them middle class, and now they're down to $8 an hour. They're not in the 5%. So you have this mass switch out of jobs. But again, it's misleading what's reported to us. I'm not saying anything about the media or anything, but this is what bothers me about it, is that the good jobs are found in startups of firms, which means, so you take out self-employed. Because if Eva and I both start a company, as soon as she hires one person, it's a very high bar, then she's a firm. The number of firms created in America has been going down for a long. America has stopped building. And millennials, although I think they will be better employees than people my age because they derive more meaning from their work and all of that, they don't start companies. And men start let's say firms, but men start them 3-to-1, and back to traits. Women have exactly the same God-given traits of determination, insatiable demand for independence, an unusual relationship to risk, and a bunch of stuff like that our analysts have found. So if you have 1,000 women and 1,000 men, the same big businesses ought to boom up out of either one of them. But men are 3. But if you said, where's the low-hanging fruit to bring the economy back? I would say build something intentional to get more women, get early identification on the ones that have high potential, give them accelerated development. But I think that's the single lowest hanging fruit to get this country's economy going again, and it'd also be good for everybody too. It's very, very bad, but it's fixable.
Guy.
Yeah, just this technology, the overlaying of technology on the issues that we're talking about, and again to come to a slightly different, come to the issue from a slightly different angle. We tend to talk about technology in terms of how many jobs it's going to create and how many it will destroy, and if we'll come out ahead, the sort of the Schumpeter equation. I think one of the things about technology that we've got to sort of get our heads around is it's the capacity of the technologies coming on stream in the world of work now to fundamentally transform the way we organize and do work. You know, around the world, people talk about the Uberization of work. So the classic employer-employee enterprise scenario sort of dissolves, and we get into a totally new situation. Now, one of the positive things you might say about that, and there's some negative things as well, is this gives us a chance, because you can work remotely. If you're connected, you can work wherever you happen to be. Surely that opens up new perspectives to reconcile work and life considerations and balance. And obviously we want to explore the positives of that, but there are people, I mean, France is a good example. You know, they are discussing seriously in France the right to disconnect at work. That is to say, turn off that machine that keeps us at work, because work is invading the private space. Now, it's not that we're getting it right and actually getting the right balance between professional and private space. The professional bit is invading our private space. So it's a fascinating debate, and one that probably we could do another survey on, Jim, and think it through again. Come back and talk about another time.
Thank you so much. I was going to say the lady in red, but that's about 15 people. Hello.
I think I represent many. First of all, my name is Kim Brooks. I work with Mars Incorporated, which is a food company in the DC area. And I want to thank Gallup and ILO for coming together and creating a fact base that's so useful to many of us, whether we're in the private, social, or public sectors, and can use that information to talk about these issues. I did, however, want to push a little bit and encourage you to be a little bit more prescriptive. And so I want to ask a question of Susan and Neli. If you were going to talk to a medium-sized company, whether it's domestic or international in scope, and you were to encourage them to do 3 things for their associates that would make them more productive, that would make them talent that want to stay in those companies, what would it be?
That's a fantastic question. I think Susan and Neli might have other ideas about that question.
It is indeed a fantastic question. And my first reaction, the first thing I would say is ask the women and men. I mean, that is key. We need to know what the employees in a company are thinking. So for the ILO to arrive and say, we've got all these wonderful things that we think you can do is great. We can give pointers, we can give tips, but it really has to come from them. And it has to include men. Otherwise, we really are the sound of one hand clapping. We have to have men in this discourse because they have family needs as well. We need to share with them as women, and they also need to share as well. So we've got to get that part right. Now, there are a lot of different things. Obviously, parental leave. There is flexible working hours. I can go through the list. We have lots of material on this and be happy to help you with them. But there are lots of solutions, but the demands have to come really from the people, and they vary. You saw, they vary across country, they vary across whatever industry, they vary.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes, hello, my name is Claudia Pires. I work at the Inter-American Development Bank on Gender and Diversity. I would like to, thank all of you for this interesting discussion. And looking at the data, I was thinking from the beginning, it would be incredibly interesting to see how some of these challenges that were presented, right, like, the work-life balance, the affordable care, the unfair treatment, lack of good paying jobs, all these barriers that were identified, how, are the authors or here the panelists thinking, how do we move forward on these issues, particularly in regions like Latin America, when we have 50% of the jobs in the informal sector? How do we address these institutional barriers with an infrastructure that is really not, in the best place to set up policies and rules that do not affect 50% of the workforce? I don't know if the data that you collected allows us to look at, men and women employed by these different kinds of employment, not just workers in general.
Who wants to take that? Who's got a take on that?
Yes.
You start.
It would be interesting to do, this was such a global study, to do your country of interest, right? Because then you can dig into a lot of very specific issues. I will say that's the most important thing. My foundation is based in the United States, and one of the main things we did a study with UCLA to see what were success factors that make Latinas succeed in education. And based on that study, we developed our program. So the number one program we have was parental engagement, right? If you have an engaged parent in your educational journey, you are more likely to succeed. We started a pilot program in Mexico City, taking the program and plopping it in Mexico City, and it didn't work. Because even though 99% of the people we work with here, it worked, but we had to adjust it. 99% of the people we worked with here were Mexicans and of the Mexican community, so we thought, let's go to Mexico. And when we got there, we had to do a completely different study. Because
Give us a little example of how you did it differently.
Well, in the United States, if your child doesn't go to school, somebody comes to your door and knocks on it and says you might go to jail. There's no consequence in Mexico. If your child doesn't go to school, they don't go to school. The work thing, the kids who drop out here, in Mexico, they are in the workforce. They're working. They left to go support their family. So it's very different. Parental engagement was very different in Mexico. There is a fear in the United States of interacting with institutions, whether it's a school or a bank or government. And in Mexico, it was similar, but a little different. So I think you would need a study based on Latin America specifically to dig in. I don't know what you think, Susan and Neli. Yeah. Guy?
Yeah, just to follow through on that, to say that the informal economy is a bit the gorilla in this particular living room. In Latin America, it's nearly half of people working in informality. I think the good news is that the ILO adopted a new instrument on formalization of the informal economy 2 years ago. It's actually got some traction in policy making, as I'm sure you'll be aware, in Latin America. And the thing we understand about this is you need quite a sophisticated combination of approaches. It's not just about labor inspection to make sure a company would be sanctioned for employing people informally. It's about social security arrangements, it's about taxation arrangements, it's above all about administrative arrangements. What it takes to register a small enterprise legally can be an obstacle course. So we understand that these are really important things to address the questions, and yes, it's absolutely true. Women tend to be concentrated in informal activity, in those contributing family worker situations. And it brings me back to this question of the qualitative aspect of the manner in which women find their place in the world of work.
So here's the challenge. We have all of these people with questions, and we have our panel, and we have Neli and Susan here. I would like to get all your questions answered. So here's the deal. You make them very to the point, and the panel will be very to the point too. I guarantee that, panel. All right. Your very succinct question is
my
what?
name is Chini Nwagbo, and my profession is probably different than everyone in this room. I am a professional basketball player, but I just retired last year. And the lady from Mars, she did an impeccable job, because I was in line for about 20 minutes and she asked the question that I actually wanted to ask, and I think it's a great question.
Bye.
Yeah, so yes. Yeah.
Wow. You stood up to say that your question's already been answered.
Well, I stood here so long that I just wanted to say hi and thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
That is dedication. All right. Didn't I just see you over there? No, okay, good.
Another man.
All right, sorry. All men look the same.
Shout out. I agree with the notion of unpatronizing male feminists. That's a great idea. I have a question for Guy Ryder. You have a fairly ambitious...
Be a little closer to the microphone.
Sure. My question is for Guy Ryder. You have a fairly ambitious idea for the upcoming 100th anniversary of the ILO, the future of work. It's sort of, to use geek speak, it's sort of about the global governance of work. What's the finding of this report that surprised you, or that influences your thinking about that agenda for the overall future of work, other than the two things that you've emphasized: cultural relativism about women and the sort of informal or gig economy? Thank you.
Succinctly to say, well, clearly that the majority of women want to work and to reconcile work with other life responsibilities. And the second point, which appears in the report, and it comes from supporting evidence from Gallup, which is that women, and indeed men too, but in this case women's satisfaction with their life status correlates strongly with having access to full-time employment status. So when we look at the future of work, it seems to me if we're after the pursuit of happiness, we ought to be doing our very, very best to make sure that where they want to, women do have access to a decent job.
My name is Jennifer Linkletter. I work at FHI 360 in the gender department. I'm really excited to see Sheila today. When I was in grad school and I needed some flexible employment, I signed up to be a caregiver at care.com. My question, since we've touched today a lot on the biggest challenge for women, which is the work-family balance, I would like maybe the panel to speak to men engaging more in the home in unpaid care work. And then also, Sheila, if you could speak to maybe what you've seen as far as market demand for having male caregivers. And also,
which question is your favorite question?
Okay, so Sheila, maybe you could talk a little bit.
Tell me your favorite one, and that's the one that will get answered.
Okay. I'll be very succinct with both.
All right.
I promise.
Okay.
All right.
So we're seeing actually, because we provide care at work benefits in the workplace, so we do our own surveys, we're seeing millennials actually responding that there's a 50-50 split with men wanting to participate more, and they believe they've got a role in caregiving. That's obviously in more developed countries than in developing countries. And then the second, in senior care, given the rise in the demand, it's a very physically demanding job that men are starting to consider going into that role. It's also increasing unemployment due to the future of work and technology that I'm hopeful to see more men going into senior care to professionalize that as well.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brandy. I'm a student from UCLA, currently interning here in DC. So my question goes towards Sheila as well. So as you know, our population is aging. In the next 30 to 50 years, the senior population is going to grow vastly, which means the demand for caregivers will also grow. So I'm doing research in this, and it's a highly feminized, line of work. It's mainly women, women of color, immigrants as well. And so, sorry, I'm a little nervous, but
what's the question?
Yeah, so it's feminized and it's devalued historically. So how do we contend with this being the fastest growing labor force and it being like the lowest paying job? Like, what are you doing at care.com to kind of contend with that? Yeah.
So there's so many issues. There's attitudes, there's lack of training, lack of education. We launch Who Cares? And it's about raising the awareness of the importance of the caregiving job. We also at care.com launched the first ever pooled portable benefits, care.com benefits, to allow access for caregivers to be cared for down the line, because as gig workers, they don't really have access to great benefits, because in this country specifically, it's through institutionalized institution jobs. And so we're constantly thinking about that. We're also forming the Care Institute to really figure out training, as I mentioned, with regards to the DMV. There's nothing like it, but we can't do this alone. It takes a village to solve these problems, so it's a real public-private partnership across the board with labor, nonprofit, government, and the private sector.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for waiting so long. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Dana Rickster, and I'm the president of the Multicultural Network for BAE Systems, which is another large defense contractor like GD. So I'm intrigued by the fact that you will be there speaking to them tomorrow. I love the way that the facts and stats from the study have been supplemented by the panelists' personal experiences and opinions. And there were a couple quotes that really stood out to me today. The first is Eva's, when you said, "We don't need to get the message out. We need to get these messages into the hearts and minds of people, young men and everyone, so something can be done about these issues." I just thought that was important because it's so true. And finally, my question, Sheila, if you would please do me a favor and repeat the quote from Jim related to
what he said.
Women and leadership. Yes.
Are you tweeting this out?
No, I'm not. No.
All right.
We do have a large event, a conference next week with our multicultural network, so I'm probably going to share some of these.
Do you want Sheila to say it slowly so you can type it into your phone?
I've got someone handling that.
All
for
right,
me
good.
back.
All right, absolutely. I'm happy to get your email and I'll send it to you too. Failing to maximize women's talent to lead, manage, and build stunts global economic growth and fails humankind.
And Susan, you were just saying, or Neli?
I just want to tell you that when you get out of this room, you will all be able to get our report with Jim's quote and everything there. And also, in response to your comment about looking at each country separately, at the end of this report, we have dashboard for each of 142 countries with main stats for this.
Great. All right, very good. I'm going to give you a 3-minute warning panel for your top priority from women in work. What is your takeaway that you want to leave our audience with? Everybody apart from Guy, because Guy gets closing remarks. But the rest of the panel, it's your 2-minute warning. Hello. Final question. This is great. We did it.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Robin Sanders. I was previously a career U.S. diplomat. My last job was U.S. ambassador to Nigeria, and I own a advocacy initiative on global issues. My question is a practical one and a global one. Given the environment today, the political environment of not caring about other people, particularly migrants and immigrants, and the racial divide and where we are globally, Europe here, what are some of the practical 1 or 2 things that we could do, or that you would suggest we do, to raise this issue of women and make it important to those who are on the opposite side of the political divide? I think that we have a practical challenge in trying to take what the data shows and making it effective and having it as an impact. So what would be the 1 or 2 things you would recommend that the private sector could do, that government policy workers could do, and where is the money going to come from to do that? Thank you.
Susan. Everybody on the panel was like, that way, that way.
I love you, Femi, thank you. Actually, very simply put, we need to get to a space where our nonpartisan solutions are the answers, and that we're not dependent on who is in power or who isn't or what's going on. That's why, in fact, maybe I'll disagree with Jim here, I'll take the liberty, policies are important, folks. You need to have solid policies. You need to be they need to be embedded in the systems of governance so that we don't really have to worry about this, that it's something that is taken care of, that, you know, honestly, that it should become a non-issue down the road. Thank you.
Except, Susan, what I was thinking, what Jim was saying, he said, I don't believe in policies, but he was describing a perfect policy, which was put a woman in an executive role. That is a policy, even if he doesn't acknowledge it as a policy.
But Susan, I would just say that I think you have to be real careful, and I'm not talking about business, I'm talking about all organizations, so I'm counting NGOs and all of that kind of thing too, but when you hear policy, you think I'm doing it to serve Washington. That's what an American thinks. So I think, oh great, get me some lawyers and all that kind of thing. I think you gotta change the paradigm, and again, I don't think this thing's going to advance as fast as we all need it to. And I'm only talking economically. I like transactional. I told you the one before. If you're on a board, and this I think would change America and hence the whole world, if you said, who are our 3 top execs? I want one of them to be a woman. The second thing is, to the question that the Mars lady ran, which is one of the best run companies in the world, if you're a board member, if you did the second and last thing, and this is to when you said prescriptive, this is prescriptive as it gets. Just raise your hand, and everybody here is on some boards, and say, bring me the map of our managers. So if you have 1,000 people, that means 100. Say, let me see the 100. If you're like Mars and you have 250,000, that means you have 25,000, then you got 2,500 top execs. Map them, let me see who they are. Whatever percent they are of men, so maybe it's 60%, 80%, as a board member, excuse me, demand that it go up 10% or 20%, and that'll change the world.
Jim, I think that's your takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say just one little thing to that? That's a perfect example, everyone, of why the ILO has 3 constituencies. We have government, we have business, and we need business and what employers are thinking, and we have the trade unions as our members as well. And I think when you have that trilogy, you can actually be able to be speaking about the real world. I mean, Eva, you're a union member. You're part of SAG-AFTRA.
Yeah.
Your employers, entrepreneurs, we have everything here. So I think that's really also something to remember. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So Angus, what's your takeaway?
Okay, what do I do?
There you go.
Is that okay? All right. Just to push this further in a couple of directions. I think that the power here is among activists at national rather than international levels. And I think pushing these sort of reports, these data, down to more detailed regional, individual country levels, and feeding that information into the democratic discussions and civil society is incredibly important, and that's where I would go. There's a lot of women that we have not heard about today at all. I mean, if you think of a country like India, for instance, where most of the population is still in rural agriculture, talking about jobs just makes no sense at all. And yet those women are very heavily oppressed. They're not living very good lives. The men are not living great lives either, but the women's lives are worse. And by talking about jobs and the world of work, that's almost an insult to those people. That's just not where we are. So I would urge us to get down to that level too. Thank you very much.
Sheila, if there's one thing that people remembered from what you said this morning, what would the one thing be? What would you say? This, remember this.
I'm going to do two, and I've promised to do it fast. Care equals jobs. Jobs help. Female participation in the workplace drives economic growth. Really, really critical. So care is not a soft issue. It's key to the economy. And it's also very transpartisan. It's a place where both sides can come together to say we care deeply about families. And then the last thing is touching on what Jim also said, is that putting women in charge. Putting women in charge. But here's the thing. We need men to help have that vision. We need men like Guy, like Sir Angus, like Jim. We need men to speak up beyond the activists that you see up here, right? We go to conferences and we preach to the choir all the time, but we need men, and men, I am talking to you. If we want this to change, you've got to play a leadership role of bringing women up.
Mm-hmm. That's good. All right. I want to echo a little bit of what Jim said about policies and why policy is important. Our Constitution doesn't give us rights in this country. The Constitution gives the government power to protect our natural God-given rights, okay? So you have to demand this from your politicians and from your government. You can't hope and ask and really be kind about, I hope they initiate a policy for maternity leave. You demand it, because that is their job as your politician, as your congressperson, as your senator, as your governor, as your whatever it is federally or statewide. You have to remember that. And women in particular, there's not enough women in politics, so we're not at the table, so we don't have that strong of a voice. And so encouraging more women to get into politics so that these issues can be addressed. But I love what you said about Dr. Gallup when he said if democracy was about the will of the people, then we have to find out what that will is. And I think that's what is so beautiful about this study, and I applaud you guys for doing this. I will leave you with this quote, which is Padre Angel, who runs a foundation in Spain. He said, women don't just give you what you need, women share what they have. And when women give that much to their families, to their community, to their spouses, to their kids, we have to make sure the infrastructure of opportunity is there for them to succeed.
I know you'll be disappointed to know that this is almost over, but not quite, because in 45 minutes' time, if you can get online on Facebook at the ILO page, this conversation will continue there. So I will see you there in about 45 minutes. My very last job before I hand over to Guy for the closing remarks is to say, ladies and gentlemen, your panel.
Well, thanks very much indeed. It really is extraordinarily difficult to try to say the sort of the last things after such a great exchange. Thanks to everybody who's taken part in it, in whatever capacity. Let me, and it is inevitably going to be somewhat telegraphic, just share with you some of the thoughts that I've been noting down as the conversation has evolved. The first thing to say is, and I think it's the enormous value of the survey that's been done and the conversation we've had upon it, is it strikes me if we want to move forward with objectives which I take to be very widely shared in this room, it's important to sort of take that reality check, which this study allows us to do. And it's a reality check in two dimensions. One is, what are the current circumstances of women in the world of work? And the second is, what are the current attitudes out there, which are inevitably some of the things that we're going to have to address as we try to move from the evidence that we've collected and discussed today towards the action that we must take tomorrow. And you know, there's a lot there which is challenging, there's a lot there which is complex, but it needs, I think, to to provide an imperative for future action. In that regard, I think we have to keep our eyes wide open to the realities of our circumstances. Politics, political atmospherics around the world, and I'm not talking about any one country, may not be terribly helpful to some of the things that we've been discussing today. And secondly, labor market conditions in the world. Global unemployment is just nudging above 200 million this year. There aren't many jobs out there. Global employment continues to increase. And I think one of the dangers is that issues of equality, issues of gender justice at work run the risk of being putting aside, saying, hey, we've got other imperatives, we've got other priorities to address. And we have to counter those types of argument. And one of the ways of doing that is through establishing the right public policy agenda. Now, I'm one of those. I'm doing policy. I believe that a very specific and very explicit policy agenda around gender issues at work is fundamentally important. The good news is we have it. We have it. If anybody didn't notice, the United Nations adopted its 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And this is a commitment of the international community, not just one or two people in the international community. It is to full employment, to decent work for all, and equality at work, equal pay, anti-discrimination provisions. The world has signed off on this agenda. Now that's great. It's a great thing to do in New York at the General Assembly to sign off on an agenda. We now have to construct the permanent engagement to make it happen. And I've just noted down 2 or 3 things which seem to me to be of fundamental importance as we tackle that job. As has come out so clearly in this conversation and in the survey itself, this reconciliation of working life, work-life balance. And yes, the vocabulary has changed. In the 80s, we talked about work-family, and that in itself is a sort of a comment upon changing attitudes. I think this is massive. I think it is complicated. It will take, yes, individual initiatives by enterprises. It will take action by trade unions. It will take action by individual governments as well. It's going to really require us to try to shape the future of work. I keep coming back to this issue that as we talk about these gender-related aspects, the world of work is being transformed before our eyes. We've got to catch that train, and we've got to hook our wagon of gender equality to this train of transformation. And some will see great opportunities in that, and I indeed believe that those opportunities are there to be seized. But there are also dangers. There are also things that can happen out there that could make the situation worse rather than better. And it's activism and intervention that will make the difference. For the ILO's part then, so we've got the work-life balance. Let's not forget the equal pay piece. I mean, the fact of this 23% gender pay gap around the world is just an extraordinary situation of injustice that, frankly, if it manifested itself in any other place and in any other way, would be regarded as entirely intolerable and to be eliminated. I worry that we don't do enough on that. The last point I would make, and I understand we're meeting in the United States, and this has been actually not an US-centric conversation. We do need to keep in mind, and Sir Angus has just reminded of us, the massive variety of circumstances in which women work in the world of work. I think any program we develop, it's got to work in Silicon Valley, it's got to work in the Nile Valley as well. We've got to speak to everybody in the world of work. And that's why, and it doesn't come out very strongly in the survey, the notion of unfair, abusive treatment of women at work, of harassment, these are very current issues. And just as a sort of a plug for future work the ILO will do, we'll be starting a discussion next year with a view to the adoption of an International Labour Convention against violence and harassment at work, against women and against men. And the last piece is, and it's a commitment from the ILO, that as we go towards this centenary, which we celebrate in 2019, everything that we've discussed today is going to be centre stage. We want a future of work which is the future of work that we want, which is not imposed upon us by any external circumstance, not technology, not anything else. And that requires us to turn our minds very, very determinedly, not just to the overall issues of global unemployment, of social protection, of rights at work, but clearly to the question of gender justice at work. And our Women at Work Centenary Initiative will make sure, will do everything that we can to ensure that the ILO takes its part of the weight on its shoulders. But we can only do that with the help of everybody in this room and the people you represent, the organizations you come from, and the insights that you bring. And for that, very warm thanks. Thank you.
Wait, can I just say we need to give a round of applause to our Femi. Great job.
Oh, really? I'm fine. Thank you so much. We are so done right now. Enjoy the rest of International Women's Day, and don't forget Facebook Live and the ILO Facebook page in about 45 minutes from now. See you there.
That was amazing.